There we go. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I will give everyone kind of a second to hop in. I know it usually takes some time as you hop into our webinar today. But as you're joining us, I am going to ask briefly, I'm going to throw a poll into the chat. Where are you joining us from? Are you from the Lehigh Valley in one of the two counties that we serve? Are you from another county in Pennsylvania? So feel free to answer as you enter. I will say that for those who were a little early, they got to see some behind the scenes moments because I have been, just having one of those tech weeks of mistakes. So I apologize for that, but thank you for your patience. Yeah. But we're excited to have you today and have some, genuine conversation about what it is to serve teens and support teens in navigating healthy relationships. So I'll give another minute or so for anyone who is just hopping in, where you're joining us from. Looks like we have a good majority are from the Lehigh Valley, which is awesome. In the meantime, while you are answering the poll, would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
So I'm Geraldine. I am the Children's Advocacy Director, and I oversee our counseling and prevention side of the program.
Okay.
And I'm Tessa King. I'm the youth prevention advocate. So I do a lot of the prevention, outreach, and some of our counseling groups as well.
Awesome. And I am Panayota Papadopoulos. I am one of the training and education advocates here at Turning Point of Lehigh Valley. And I'm looking forward to hosting your conversation today. So I'm going to end this poll for anyone who has shared this. Let's see. We are almost split. So about half from Lehigh, half from Northampton County. So thank you for joining us again. And I believe there is a question. Hopefully you are able to type in the chat as well. So if you have any questions throughout, please feel free to type in the chat or send us questions through the Q&A feature. We'll kind of be monitoring those as we go. Quick notes, there will be certificates of completion or of attendance in a follow-up email to everyone who attends today. There will also be a feedback survey that pops up in a separate window and will be in a follow-up email. We do ask that out of just confidentiality and for the safety of everyone who's here, that if you do have any personal or specific questions about an individual that, you contact our helpline or speak to one of us privately afterward. But if you have any general questions that may be good for the benefit of the whole, please feel free, again, to either type in the chat or to use our Q&A feature. But yeah, I guess, really the interest in bringing up this topic this month was, February, number one, Valentine's Day, right? We always think about love and healthy relationships and things on that nature. But two, many people don't realize that February is Teen and Dating Violence Awareness Month. So that being said, we just wanted to kind of talk about, how does our child and teen program work here at Turning Point, and what do you guys do? So do you want to talk a little bit about your programming and what you offer to the community?
Sure. So we are in Lehigh and Northampton counties school districts, and we offer two empowerment groups. I'm Her, which is a female empowerment group, and Spaces, which is a male empowerment group. And then Kessa does a world tour of presentations around the schools. And she can speak a little bit more about that too. Go ahead, Kessa.
Yeah, so I do a lot of our healthy relationships presentations, and it is truly a world tour. I think this week I probably went to about 5 or 6 different schools, but just kind of focusing on what makes a relationship healthy versus unhealthy. And then I also do like tabling events, community outreach events, just trying to really educate and let people know what our youth program specifically does.
I know one thing that is often shared is kind of the swag that you guys have, right? I've heard that word thrown around a few times. Um, so can you talk to me a little bit about, how what the groups look like on like a day-to-day basis? How are they broken down? What kinds of topics do you guys cover?
So, like some of the topics we cover, red and green flags. I think that's like the biggest thing that we always cover because I feel like teens are so excited when they hear red flag or like toxicity. They're just like, yeah. And they all want to share like the story or like they'll be pointing to each other in class. But those are like the things that really excite them to talk about. Um, and they just like having that space to talk about relationships because that's like their whole world. You'll walk down the hallways going to like these classrooms, and if you just like listen into all the conversations, it's about relationships.
Mhm. Yeah, and in those groups, we just learn about what healthy relationships are with yourself and also with others. We go through like boundaries, how to communicate with others, what conflict resolutions are. So it's a bunch of conversations revolving like how can we learn more about healthy relationships. So we do high schools, like we have groups for high school and we also have groups for middle school. I personally love the middle school. They're just so fun and wild. You just never know what's going going on. But yeah, and we get those referrals through the coordinators in schools, sometimes through counselors. So it could look from like 12 students to 8 to like 20 at some point. So yeah.
That's awesome. And I know, yeah, you mentioned like middle school and high school, right? That
Mhm.
so for anyone not aware, I used to be a middle school, high school Spanish teacher, and middle school dynamics are very interesting. I feel like that is really when kids are starting to, kind of develop themselves, their identity, and also their support system. And relationships are super important at that point. And unfortunately, a lot of times I feel like that's also when we see a lot of abuse scenarios start and dynamics start. So I appreciate, first off, the work that you guys do. And you had mentioned that you have two separate groups where there's spaces and I am her, right? So can you talk to me a little bit about like the gender differences in the groups? How is the boys group different from the girls group? What comes up when sharing those things in each group?
Yeah, I think for the boys group, it's a lot of I always say like I always go in like a happy little mood and then I'm always like, guys, sit down, please. So there's already like a tension there, but they don't when you ask them how they feel about something, they have a hard time putting like a feeling to it. So most of the time in those groups, it's just like connecting that emotion, like it's just, teaching them that. Girls are more like, yeah, that was so sad. I feel so horrible. So they already like emotionally connected with themselves. Um, so I think that's the biggest difference that I've been seeing so far in those groups, especially in middle school. They definitely struggle, especially kids also that seen DV or seen domestic violence or either been in an intimate partner abuse situation, like a toxic relationship. They just struggle with connecting with their emotions. Because I do have something to add to that.
No, I mean, I agree. I especially working with a lot of like the teens, I do think like the teen boys, they do need a lot of like help with a lot of the language.
Mm,
Because they do really struggle to put words to a lot of what they're like feeling. They'll be like, miss, you just know, right? And it's like,
Right.
well, yeah, I know that we both kind of know what you mean, but let's talk about how we can talk about it. And just giving them that space to explore the things that some people are just kind of like letting go or don't have time to really talk about.
I think that's one beautiful benefit, and possibly even why there is such a good response to these programs in the schools, because it is that space where kids can talk about these things that clearly are, affecting their day-to-day lives. But in school, most of the time you are focused on either your academics or athletics, and there's not really as much time to really talk about these topics. You had mentioned that, you know, like girls are often encouraged, I think, to express emotions, but
Mhm.
boys are often told, like toughen up, be a man, right? Those sort of stereotypical phrases. So, do you discuss gender norms or stereotypes in the groups, and how does that kind of take place?
In both I'm, her, and spaces, we discuss like how does society view a man? And
Mm-hmm.
then we break that down to like not only do you have to provide financially because that's always like the first thing in their head, but also like being emotionally safe to another person is very important. And then for a woman, we also like break that down, like what are the roles that we play as a woman and like just being in middle school and being like sexualized, and we talk about that a little bit in those uncomfortable situations that happen. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think challenging like some of the traditional stereotypes that they do have that may promote like some unhealthy behavior sometimes, and just really giving them like kind of questioning like some of the things that no one has ever asked them, why do you think that is, or where do you think that comes from?
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes kids don't even realize where some of these stereotypes or values that they've held come from. Like that it's whether it's from themselves, from their friends, from family, from whatnot. Do you ever have, kids share that they don't really feel like they fit in with either of the heteronormative, gender binary of male or female stereotypes? And how do you deal with that conversation?
We adapt, um, just change the lesson a little bit. Like if, I mean, that has happened before. We went to a school where none of them identify with female, and they
Mm-hmm.
were just giving us other things that they identify with. And we just adapt to like, okay, so what is the role that we do play? Because you can play as a kid sometimes, you could be the therapist of the family and you want to fix everything. And then you can also be the like the parent to your parent. So like what are the roles that we're playing that we're bringing into relationships? So we'll just switch the conversation a little bit to be more general.
There's a specific topic that comes up throughout because it's a few sessions, right? It's
Mhm.
how
It's
many?
eight,
Okay.
eight,
And
yeah.
is there a specific topic that really resonates with either the boys group or the girls group that, seems to make a big impact?
Mhm. Yes, I do have one.
Or is it just kind of all together, the culmination of everything?
I think one thing that the boys typically like when we talk about values,
Mhm.
that is one of the lessons, and that's not something that, they really think about. Um, and so I do think when they start to look at like we kind of talk about their role models in their lives and what they take from those people, I
Mhm.
do think that that kind of sticks with them because it's not something that they just think about. They're not like, well, what do I value and how does that affect the way that I do show up in relationships?
Yeah.
I mean, not to tune our own horn, but usually the first session has them like kind of too excited. Usually because we're just talking about like what is a toxic relationship, and that usually has them like, oh, I've been waiting for somebody to come in and talk to us about that. Um, but I always see like not an excitement, but a like more intrigued in boundaries for both. They're like the boys like to push and like to like, but what if she says no? And like, what is playful? What if it's that? And girls are more like, okay, well, this happened. This is that. This is this. Um, so I see more like reflection in those two.
Mhm. Almost like finding that fine line. Where is that fine line between what's healthy, what's unhealthy, what's toxic, what's, abusive? And I've noticed, especially too, teens tend to not want to use the word abuse, but they will very easily use the word toxic. So, are
Mhm.
there other terms that you hear often or notice often in either group?
I feel like you know why they don't use the abuse because they think about like physical. Like they only
Mhm.
think about like how
Yeah.
physical abuse happens. They never think about emotional. And toxic seem it's like everywhere. It's on TikTok, it's on social media. So they're like, oh yeah, we're used to that. But it's just we're talking about the same thing. A lot of the things that I hear is like narcissistic or like
Narcissistic, yeah.
he's like gaslighting me.
Mhm.
So a
Love
lot of
bombing.
those terms. Love bombing, yeah.
Breadcrumbing is another
Manipulate.
one that I've heard recently. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, there's so many different dynamics that are coming up. So, I was gonna ask. I think another piece to all of this, like when we talk about real talk, right? I think that there's often this, expectation from a kid perspective. If we think back to like when we were in high school, right, and a new adult comes into the room, there's always this sort of like, oh, who are you and what are you going to bring to the table and how do I know I can trust you and I'm not going to open up to you. So, and the conversation of abuse and unhealthy relationships in and of itself isn't necessarily an easy topic to broach. So, I guess my question is, how do you initiate and create that safe space where the kids feel comfortable opening up? Is it an immediate thing because they're like, oh, turning point's coming? Or is it, like something that you have to kind of develop over time?
I think it's something you have to develop because a lot of kids that when they first come in, they kind of almost think that they're in trouble. And so we kind of have to be like, no, you're not in trouble. And we're just kind of really realistic about what the group is about. And like we go over our confidentiality, and typically the confidentiality kind of makes them go, okay, so they're not gonna, you know, tell all my business. But I do think it's one thing that kind of takes a little bit of time. And I do think it part of that is like us showing up for them. Just because it's so important that even if, they've had a bad day, they still know that we're gonna show up and be there to have our group.
And I feel like we allow them to show up. Like we don't censor them. Like I want to hear the words you're using, so curse, use your words, so then we can see like how you're using them. We can educate you. Like that wasn't even close to how I use that word, but let's talk about it. Um, so I know like other professionals are very strict about rules and have a lot of regulations. We're like, you don't have to be in this group at all. Like if you don't like it, you could be like, I'm out.
Mhm.
And I think just giving them that freedom allows them to put that guard down. But at first we are like, they're like sussing us out for sure.
Yeah, sus. It's a good word too.
Yeah.
Um, I think there's almost like a couple different mentalities of, again, me coming from like an educational background, there's a couple different mentalities on like classroom management and like making sure that you're the one in control of the classroom and making sure that, kids aren't taking the power away from you, that you're kind of holding that power of a group dynamic. So, does that kind of conversation ever come up? Like, how do you, assert the adult role in the space, but still create it as a safe, open space? Like, are there things that you can recommend to others who maybe work with teens to support that?
I think just like putting up boundaries, like we will demonstrate our boundaries with them and we'll call them out. We'll be like, no, what you just did, that was really disrespectful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because if we can't expect that of them if we don't show them how to do that.
Point.
I was just thinking about this today because there is a fine line of like allowing them to be themselves, but then also getting them back to like, all right, let's focus. And it is really about what are your boundaries? Like if you allow kids to play around and goof around, when like you just need to know like when is it like disrespecting your boundary? At some point you'll feel like, oh, they're not listening to me at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's where you have to step in and sit down right with them on the same table and just tell them like, hey guys, like this isn't fun. Like I'm yelling over you. Like we could stay here. I'll give you like my seventh graders spaces when I'm doing spaces. I give them 5 minutes to get all of that energy out. Like I'm like run around, jumping jacks, do 5 push-ups. Like let's get it all out before we start because they know they can be themselves. It's just like, all right, let's share it. Let's share the space.
I also appreciate that, and I know that sometimes that's a minority perspective, but I do appreciate the fact that you allow them to use their own language, right? Whether it be inappropriate language or, just being themselves, because you're right, there really is that opportunity to not only engage in that, but also like redirect and educate within that space. So I think, yeah, I think in doing that, it like empowers them, right, to be themselves, but still modeling. Like, Kessa, I think you said, you can come in and have a bad day, but you're still showing up for them. And I think sometimes we as adults are afraid to show that vulnerable space of like, man, I'm having a bad day and I don't want to be here, but I have to be here, or, anything along those lines. As a parent, as a teacher, as, whatever adult role you're in. But I think that there's something powerful in modeling that, like, hey, I'm having a bad day too, but at the same time, let's talk about it. Like, I'm here to help you recognize what you're feeling and also like let's talk about it together. So I guess with that being said, when we were kind of talking about this conversation, you had shared that you do collect anonymous questions as well from kids and talk to them about, address the group questions after the fact, that sometimes they're from different groups or whatnot. It's really just that anonymous, safe space to be able to address those things. So that being said, if we're going to be real, what are some real things that teens are sharing with you? What are concerns that you're seeing? Or are there like repeat patterns in what kids are often bringing up?
I think one of the most like popular questions is like how to leave or either how to fix a relationship that is no longer working. Um, those are like the most asked questions that we get in those anonymous questions. I don't know, because if you're seeing a different pattern than I am.
No, I think they either want to like fix it because they're really attached and healing is kind of like a scary thing and the idea of being alone is even scarier for them. And I also think sometimes well, a lot of times what pops up is like guilt. They feel like they're not doing enough in the relationship, or if they make their partner mad, like they have to make up for it. Things like that.
I imagine often at that age, as in adult presentations, which is what I do, we often talk about, the question is always like, well, why don't you just leave? Right? But we never kind of flip it on the other person, like, well, why is this person abusing? Why are we not putting the onus on the person who is actually acting, and behaving in these ways? But you're right, they are likely just learning those dynamics of how to interact and provide those conflict resolution tactics, that we try to teach. But yeah, kind of recognizing when is it something that's repairable versus when is it something that is, okay, maybe it is time to like step away and kind of set those boundaries up. Do you have any like questions or things that are specific that you want to share in this space of other concerns that you've received or in this?
I feel like the parent one it always comes up because they can't leave their parents. So
Mm,
whenever they see like that dynamic at home,
mm,
that this abuse at home, how do they leave? How do they find a safe space? Not how do they leave because they can't really, but we see a lot of that. A lot of these questions, the way that we answer them is just like not throwing it back to them, but making them almost like slow down and reflect. When you're in an unhealthy relationship, you forget all about yourself. When you see it at home, you forget all about yourself. Um, so what we try to do is, how did that make you feel? How did you feel about that? So he did this, 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 and then you like this happened. And then like we try to like break it down so then they can hear it out loud and they can kind of come back to themselves as well. Same with like the things at home. I think that's like the most like difficult part of our job is like how do you help a kid that can't leave a situation at home? Um, yeah.
yeah, because you're right, they're not just dealing with the teen dating issues, but they may even be dealing with it at home and witnessing their own family members or whatnot, kind of within an abusive situation. So, Kessa, did I cut you off?
Oh, no.
Okay.
But I do think another question that comes up a lot is like, how can you be sure if like you aren't losing yourself in the relationship? Because I think, when you're a teen, you are creating your own identity. And so it's kind of a sensitive time when you are trying to be your own person, but then you're also trying to be in a relationship and trying to find that balance of what does it mean to be myself, but then also be a person in a relationship. And so that one comes up a lot.
Do you notice, like, within the group dynamic when kids are sharing that they kind of hold each other accountable? Do they, point each other out like, oh, that was toxic, or like, how does that work within the group dynamic?
They definitely love doing that. They will like we will say an example of something that's like unhealthy, and then they'll all look at the person like, oh, she's talking about you.
Uh-huh.
Um, yeah. Or they'll hold like other what I've been seeing in like the middle school in the spaces group is that they're like very they want to protect like now the girls outside of that group. And
Mm.
they're like, oh yeah, we want to like catch every toxic guy in the in in school and like talk to them about it. So I see that like I see a lot of them trying to protect the girls now in the school. So that's always that's nice, fun.
Yeah, that's awesome that they're, kind of sharing the love, so to speak, right, and supporting one another even outside of the group. Um, I know one thing that came up, I think you briefly mentioned it earlier, was how specifically with boys, right? How, there's often that dynamic of, okay, if a girl is arguing with you or whatnot, you can't fight a girl, right? And not that I'm not encouraging fighting. Um, but, does it ever come up where boys aren't really sure how to handle if their female partner is being aggressive with them, or how do you kind of tackle that conversation in both groups?
Yeah, so we see a lot of a lot of girls that are pretty loose with their hands. Um, and so when we talk to the boys about it, it's really just kind of validating the feelings that they feel because that makes them feel really powerless. Just because they have to walk this really fine line in trying to maintain a boundary, but also being upset that their boundaries being violated, as the girls like we've heard that, they'll come up and slap them in the face, they'll push them around. And so it's just really upsetting for them because they aren't sure what to do.
There's a lot of anger that's validated in
Mm,
them because they can't do nothing about it in the moment. Like they almost have to like take the hit and then they can talk about it later. I find it interesting that I keep bringing up the middle school, but I told you guys I love them, so I'm gonna keep like, bringing them up. But the middle school, when someone disclosed that he was physically abused by his partner, they were very like concerned for him. No one laughed. No one was like, "Oh, you get hit by a girl." Like they were like, "Yeah, miss, like she does hit him. Like we seen it." Um, and they were concerned for him. So I think that it's just like validating that experience and then also walking them slowly to that reality of like, no matter how angry you get, you can't do it back. Like you just can't. Um, because there's just been incidents where they stopped the fight or stopped the hit from receiving it from a girl and then they got in trouble.
mm,
So it's always like walking them like, yeah, and
mhm,
this happened.
mhm. Yeah, no, you're right. And it's interesting you mentioned like the concept of validation too, right? Like making sure that we're providing that space for them to feel comfortable to share, but also validating that as a, genuine experience that I think sometimes, especially with these sorts of conversations, it can be hard as an adult to not, what's the right word? Like try to redirect in a way that may feel controlling to the kid, like, oh, gosh, my mom just wants me to do this, or this teacher just wants to control me or whatever. So I guess how can you explain the difference between like validation and minimizing what a kid is going through, because I imagine that's a really powerful minor line as well.
Mhm. I think one of the things we hear is like if a 14-year-old is going through something, the moms or the parents or like staff, they always react with like, you're 14, you don't even know yet. Like you don't even know it, like what's coming. But in their world, whatever's happening, no matter the age it is, from five, a 5-year-old favorite crayon could break, and that's the end of the world. And you just kind of have to be like, oh no, and like validate them on that. Same
Yeah.
with the 14-year-old that just got their heart broken for like the second time, maybe that year. Um, I forgot the question and all of that. I'm just
Validation versus oh my gosh,
Minimize.
minimize
thank
it.
you, yes,
Yeah.
thank you. um,
Um, yeah, I think we want to all jump in and like save them, but
mhm.
we won't be able to if we are pressuring them into what we want or what we think is good. If they're doing something super like harmful, do jump in. But if it's something like, hey, like he keeps texting, like I don't know, like if it's like walking them through something that they're going through that's a heartbreak that we know like when you're older you're gonna forget about this.
Mhm.
It's just slowing that down for them. Like, tell me more about that. How did that happen? How do you feel about it? Well, that sounds a little like scary to me, but how does it feel like to you? Like, put in words to it as well, like as if it's a conversation instead of like, I'm gonna lecture you on what I think is right and do it my way. I think they listen a little bit more when we're like on their same level, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's almost like the talking at them versus talking with them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like allowing them to essentially put the words to their own experience, but being in that moment with them. It's kind of like, I don't know if anyone else has seen this, but there's a video from Brene Brown where she's talking about how sympathy versus empathy, and how in one space in sympathy you're kind of like looking at the person and kind of creating a silver lining, like, well, at least this, and you're not really with the person and helping, like experiencing it with them and just being there to support them. But with empathy, with that validation, you're kind of in that moment with them and kind of helping them hold and carry whatever it is they're going through. But you're right, age really shouldn't matter, right? Where, if this is their first heartbreak, yes, as an adult you might see that and be like, oh, you're young, you'll have more. But for them, you're right, it's their first heartbreak. It's the first time they're experiencing a pain that deep potentially. So wanting to support and validate that. Other thoughts, questions? Okay. I think one thing that I wanted to ask too is, how, because we talk about how with teens, they're often trying to, even with adults, we're often trying to navigate that line between what is healthy versus what is unhealthy, right? So, what are some of the biggest red flags that you see that teens often ignore, and like how can we help them kind of pay attention to those red flags that might be occurring?
I think one thing that is really popular just because like social media and technology is so ingrained in like our lives and especially teens' lives is a lot of the behaviors that come with that, like constantly monitoring like each other's social media, the password sharing, location sharing. Not that any of those are inherently bad, but I feel like a lot of times there will be a certain aspect of control that comes with those that teens are just like, oh, that's just normal. We, you know, they can look through my phone. And so I think a lot of those are normalized, but they can like develop into kind of red flags.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think also the speed of the relationship.
Mm,
I get really worried when I hear like, oh yeah, we've been dating for a week and I love him. I'm like, "Oh, what about? Like, what do you love? Like, let's really talk about that."
yeah,
Um, so I think the speed is always something to pay attention to. Like if it's going so fast, and one of the things that kids are doing now is like, hey, what's like your trauma? What's every in a week to talk about trauma is a lot. Like let's get to know each other for like a few months, please. Um, so I think it's just that for me, it's the speed. I'm always looking at the speed, like what's going on.
yeah. That's a really good point, and especially too with like the concept of love bombing, and
Hmm.
like the cycle of abuse in general, right? We know that I always argue that pretty much every relationship starts off in that honeymoon phase, but like in a healthy relationship, right, as time goes on, you start to like slowly be vulnerable with each other, build that trust, right? And it's developed over time. But then in, you know, in a in an abusive or unhealthy situation, right, we see kind of that love bombing immediately, that pace, kind of rapid fire. And yeah, you're absolutely right. That yeah. Does anyone ever come to you and ask like, well, what do I do if I think I'm I have the red flags?
You do. They
What
asked
do you
that.
say in those scenarios? Or how
Well,
do you
usually we
support
just
them?
kind of, yeah. I guess it depends on the space. Like, if it's in group, we're like, well, let's, tell me a little bit more about that. What, what about those behaviors to you are red flags? And just kind of getting them to self-reflect, um, because a lot of times they don't really think about what they're doing, and develop that sense of self. So it's really just kind of digging into, okay, where's that coming from? Why are you saying this?
Hmm. I think they did the first step, which is like being aware that you got some red flags. Like we all got. I find it weird if everybody's like, I'm a green flag. I'm like, where's the self-awareness? Let's like some of us have some yellow things, some yellow flags, some red flags. So I think it's a first step. Um, and like Kessa said, just like walking them through that, like, where did you learn that behavior? Because you wasn't like you ain't come to the world being a red flag. So yeah, just walking them through that.
It's back to that values conversation too, and kind of right, like
Hmm.
yeah, talking about their values, their boundaries, and what they want for their future. Um, Another thing you had mentioned too, when we talk about concerns that come up, I imagine you had shared that sometimes the girls especially will share like, well, this person kind of pushed me into this thing, and I, or if a guy, oh my goodness, if a girl's like, no, I don't, and kind of playing, and they can't always
Hmm.
tell the line between that coercion versus consent. Like, do you have that conversation of not just consent within a physical relationship, but consent and coercion within just decision making, period? So I guess how do you, I don't know, would you like to share more on that topic?
I recently did we're back to middle school. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
Did a group in middle school and I wanted them to see the difference between consent. Like I told them like if you hear like even a playful no is no. This is a wrap. Like that's it. Don't try it again. And then I was like, oh, I want to ask you guys a question. And they're like, oh, tell us. And I was like, no, it's okay. I don't want to ask it. And they're like, no, miss, come on, like tell us. You already got us intrigued. And I was like, nah. And then like stop playing with us, ask us. And then I was like, all right, like I don't want to ask. And this is coercion. Like you guys are trying to convince me to tell you something. Now that was my example with them, so they could see like even though I said no, like it's not for you to convince me. And I think that's the difference. It's like if you get a clear yes, you're good to go. If you don't get a yes, there's no in between of trying to convince them. Like it's just no. Um, and also with boys, I think one of the things I'm realizing is that girls don't ask for consent.
Mm,
Um, they just do. They just do what they do, and then the boys go along with it. And one of the things they were saying is like, Miss, so I'm gonna say no. I was like, well, like check in with yourself. Like, do you want to?
mm,
Like, slow it down. Like, slow down the experience. But yeah, I think it's always like we said, like it's at the speed. Like, just slow those interactions down because there's a lot of vulnerability that's going to happen. if you're rushing it.
Yeah.
That makes, yeah.
That's a really interesting point. Like differentiating, because you're right, that is one of those almost gender stereotypes that is expected, right? Where boys will jump into whatever, they're able to get, and then girls are often the ones that are, kind of pushing away or saying no or playfully. But you're right, then how does the individual know if the other person is actually interested? So I think, yeah, that communication but that's a really good example that you gave of, like, oh, I want to ask something, but because you're right, that does really mimic something that they would see in a normal time. And also I feel like models a great example of just how to have those conversations, period. Again, not necessarily within a physical context, but even sharing something about trauma or about having those, boundaries where sometimes somebody does want to share something about themselves and they might leave things intentionally vague, like, well, I went through this general situation, and natural curiosity on our end kicks in, or wanting to fix things and like, oh, tell me more, and what happened here. But sometimes I think that's really important in learning that respect and that boundary and that line of like, hey, it's okay, they don't have to share every single detail. And yeah, so I digress, sorry, my brain is like all over the place. Yeah, I guess with go ahead.
No,
Oh, I thought I
nothing.
heard. Okay. With teens who share that they might be experiencing abuse in the home, what are some like small practical tips or ways that you support them or teach them kind of how to protect themselves, whether it be physically, emotionally, etc.?
I mean, I think one thing that we always try to do is just let them know that that dynamic that they're seeing in the home, if it's abusive, that's not a normal thing. Because we don't want them to go on thinking that's how relationships should be. So just kind of having that conversation and, how can we safety plan? Like, what are the options? Because typically there's a lot of patterns. So if there's like this pattern in the home, what can you do to make sure that you're safe? Or I don't know, would you feel safer if you like joined a club or did some more extracurriculars or anything like that? But just like those small things that they can do to create that sense of safety.
Mhm. A kid or a teen that's in that dynamic already knows the cycle of abuse. Like they can walk you through it with that scenario. They already know, like, hey, if it's Saturday and I see them pick up a beer, like I need to be in my room or I need to like do something. So it's like sad to say, but I like to offer like, what can you do to distract yourself if this is happening? Because a lot of kids like to save their parents from it, and that could also be like a little dangerous. Like my heart breaks when I hear like kids saying like, "Oh yeah, I'm the one that always calls the police." Like so now you're like 14 explaining to a police officer what just happened every time it happens. So I think they're aware of like the patterns that's going on. I think it's in those individual counseling sessions that we have, it's just like Kessa said, just making sure that they don't normalize it and that not every home looks like this and it's not supposed to be this way. And let's learn about what love should sound like, feel like, look like. Um, yeah, finding that safety within themselves as well. It's important.
I think I like, you mentioned kind of checking in with yourself too and slowing them down. And I think also that reminder of, check in with your body too. Like, do you
Mm-hmm.
feel uncomfortable? Do you feel chaotic? Do you, feel like you're on a roller coaster? Or do you have a gut feeling that something's off? Or does this sound inappropriate to you? Kind of because I imagine, especially if you grow up in those environments, that it can be really hard for you to recognize, right, what is the normal versus what is the unhealthy or the abusive. So just, yeah, encouraging them to take that step back too and kind of pay attention to what's going on in their body. So, how can we, again, if we're talking about how to be like real with teens and how to encourage those spaces where they feel empowered to be themselves, but also to be a healthier version of themselves. Like how do you enter a space where number one, you're outnumbered, but how do you enter a space where you can kind of develop that credibility and that trust over time? Like, how are you able to be authentic and real without it coming across as you like trying too hard?
That is a hard line because we're cringy already. Like adults are just cringy if we use like period and slay and all that stuff. So I
Mhm.
think it's just being like truly yourself in there. Like how if you make a mistake, like just say I made a mistake, like I'm sorry. Like maybe that the wording didn't come off right. Or I in sessions, like if there's a chair that it's available right next to me, I would put I put my feet on it. Like I'm just myself. Like I'm like, I'm tired. I'll put this right here. Like we're like it's just a conversation. We're talking about very like heavy things and then send them back to class. If I like we can make it really like serious if we really wanted to, and those are serious conversations, but I think like making the room a little more like safe for them to just I let kids walk around the room. I think it's more about like allowing them to be themselves without like overstepping of like don't do that, don't say that. And kids say things that we don't know, so I always tell the team like literally ask them like what did you just say? Like what does that mean? Like what is that slang word? Like yeah, just be truly yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, because they can definitely tell if you're not being genuine or if you're trying too hard. Like for me, I'll never, like, I feel like sometimes we try to find something to relate, which is helpful, but I'm never going to try to relate to something I don't know anything about. Like, especially like sports. I don't know anything about sports, so I'm not going to try to talk about them. But what I will talk about is like, what is like what are they saying? What is if they say something, I'm always the first one to be like, I don't know what that means. Can you tell me what that means? And they're usually just like, oh, okay, yeah. Um, and so they're usually like really happy to, explain whatever and so that we can understand them better.
Yeah, I'm gonna call out Kessa a little bit because she does this, but I love that she does this. We work with like a lot of Hispanic kids, Black, Hispanic kids, and Kessa goes in there and says, I know, like, what is a white person gonna teach you about relationships? I just love that she makes that awareness, because it breaks that ice. Like there's a kid in there that's definitely like,
Yeah.
it's sussing her out.
Especially the boys, I'll be like, you're probably thinking, what does this white lady have to teach me? That always
Yeah,
gets them. They're like, yeah.
But you're right.
yeah.
I think it like just addressing, in some ways a level of privilege, but also just a different experience, period. Right?
Mhm.
Where like, hey, I might not have any idea what you're talking about, but at the same time, I'm willing to learn. And I think that
Yeah.
that willingness then models and allows it to go both ways, which is great. I love that you guys do that. Yeah, I think also too, like, if you start the conversation and come in too heavy as like I'm the authority figure, that when we talk about abuse we talk about the power and control dynamic and how it's often a power imbalance. So when we create spaces where we are the person in power, the person in control, you're automatically kind of putting them at a disadvantage and making them feel powerless. So yeah, I love that you give them that space to do that, and even like allowing them to teach you those different moments, because you're yeah, you're like putting the power back in their hands, especially if they've been through abuse. I imagine there's a level of self-confidence that they might be struggling with. So just giving them that ability to like, hey, teach me, puts that confidence back in their hands and allows them to yeah, feel stronger about it. So there's a question in the chat. If we want to discourage the stereotype of, the phrase man up or being manly enough in boys, what are some things that you encourage instead?
Emotional vulnerability. They encourage, let's talk about your feelings. Um, because I think the man up and telling kids to man up is whenever we see like a little boy cry because he fell. Instead of asking him like, "Are you okay?" Like we're like, "Get up, it's fine. Like get over it." I think the system does a really good job of doing that, and I think boys um just need a space to feel. They just need that space to completely say what they feel without thinking someone's gonna laugh. So we're constantly in the individual counseling and spaces, which is the group, wanting to hear what their emotion is. Like, what is that feeling to that? Like, how did that make you feel? Um, yeah, the emotional vulnerability is what comes to mind for me. I don't know what else comes to mind for you, Kessa.
No, I mean, I completely agree. I feel like a lot of times society does kind of tell boys like, don't show affection, don't do this, don't do that. And it's really just telling them a lot of what they do is wrong.
Mm,
And there's no like with feelings, there's really no wrong feelings, but it's just kind of how you express them.
mhm.
But if
Mhm.
we kind of completely shut that down, then we start seeing like in relationships, they're not gonna express their feelings because they're like, I don't have to do that. And the relationship suffers.
Especially boys. Boys only know like I swear in all these groups we've only seen them name like five emotions, which is like anger, happy, sad, excited,
Hungry.
and hungry. Yeah. Like like teaching them there's more and then the body expresses it differently each time. I think it's important, yeah.
Imagine too, like a lot of that comes back down also to the adult male role models that they have, and if they've been able to witness someone being more emotionally vulnerable as an adult. But an interesting conversation took place in a previous training that I think all of us attended, where they said, can women kind of lead these male support groups, that it should be led by a male, but at the same time, their argument was, well, at the same time, when you think of who men go to when they are feeling emotional and need support, it is usually the women in their life, right? Their partners, their moms, their, friends. So I think that there's something almost healing in a way of having someone be there. And I recognize just, since we're drawing attention to and validating these random moments that we are three women talking about, supporting males, but, giving them that space to be themselves. And like you said, not dismissing what they're going through just because of their gender or stereotype or identity. So yeah.
Mhm.
There's another question in the chat. Why is it so hard to say no to someone abusive? That's an interesting question.
Has Yeah, that is an interesting question. I think as like teens, it's something that's really familiar to them. If you can't say no to your parent, it's gonna be hard for you to say no to somebody else, especially if it's like your first time like express like the trauma that goes on at home, or like this is the first time I like called you beautiful, and like it's gonna be hard to like like to speak up to any of that because it's already familiar to you. Um, so the things when we were saying earlier, like trying to help teens and individual counseling see that that's not normal is the reason we do that. So then when they do step into relationships and there is abuse, that they can hopefully say like, nah, this is not for me, but that is hard. Like anybody struggles with that. So yeah.
Kessa, anything
I
to add?
mean, I agree. I just feel like in general, everybody has a hard time saying no. Especially if there's abuse involved, because some of the tactics could be like, guilt, the manipulation and things like that. And so that just makes you feel even worse when you say it, because 9 times out of 10, that person who's abusing you is gonna make you feel guilty for saying no.
And then the cycle repeats. So it goes all over again.
Yeah, I think it reminds me of two questions that you had shared from the students. The one being, How can I say no to people who will try to guilt trip me into doing things they want? Sometimes saying no makes me feel bad as if I'm hurting them if I don't do what they want. And, there is sometimes that level of guilt. There may also be that fear of like retaliation or of harm. And another question that came up was how do you know if you're being manipulated or just lacking trust? Right. And that again kind of comes back down to that fine line of recognizing, is the relationship mutual? Is there mutual effort, mutual communication? Is there mutual trust? Or is it, kind of one sided in one way or another? So, are there any other, I guess, tips or advice on how you can share help supporting either teens or just in general our loved ones in setting those healthy boundaries?
Um, just go to like the fact that you can't control what other people do or feel. Because I feel like a lot of times when they're like, I feel like I'm hurting them, it's like, well, no matter what, that's not up to you. You can't control whether someone's upset with you. You can only control what you do. And so just kind of letting them understand that, no matter what they do, they can bend over backwards to make somebody happy. But at the end of the day, you just don't have control over somebody else's feelings.
And boundaries are like things that you set for yourself. So in those groups and in individual counseling presentations, want to make sure that kids know what it feels like to set a boundary, what it sounds like, what it looks like. Because most of the time, if you don't know how to set boundaries, it's because it's never been a part of your life since like you're at home. Like if parents just want to walk in your room, they walk in, they don't knock. That's a boundary being already disrespected, right? So, um, I think it's just also like giving them that language. Like if you continue to yell at me, I'm gonna leave this conversation. That's the responsibility that you have for yourself. And then I always tell them like people always have choices. They can either choose to respect it or choose to disrespect that boundary. And then you get to choose now what you do with that information. So if they disrespect it and you choose, I'm gonna stay in here, I'm gonna stand by it,
Yeah.
that's a choice that you made. But also, if you chose to be like, I'm leaving because you obviously don't respect me, that's also a choice that you made, and then you're held responsible for both, if that makes sense.
Whichever one you choose, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's one other question that we have. Is there any advice you have or thoughts for teens who are navigating social media and relationships, especially in relationships that start off with them being strangers through social media?
Watch the speed. Watch the speed of that. Um, oh, I got scared, like thinking about like even social media dating. Like if you haven't met them, like you want to make sure that you get like the green flags out of the way, not just only like emotionally, but can they FaceTime you? Do you see them on the camera? Um, Make sure that you know who you're actually talking to. Watch the speed again of like how the relationship is going, and don't do anything you're not comfortable doing because social media is going to be there forever. So make sure that you have those boundaries set too.
Mm.
Make sure there's balance too with it. Like a lot of times it'll be one side will ask for more and more, especially through social media for like passwords, location sharing. But like Geraldine said, if you're not comfortable with that, then don't do it.
I,
Hmm.
I think also like actually saying no in something, just kind of to see how they respond to it. Like, hey, I'm not comfortable with that. Sometimes saying that early on kind of sets that healthy boundary of like, hey, no, I need my space tonight, or I want to kind of do my own thing. Allows you to sort of see how the person, if the person does respect that boundary from the get go.
Hmm.
Not that we want to go into relationships testing people, but I think it's a good, like, if that's genuinely how you feel, being able to provide that opportunity. So, any final thoughts, advice, things that you want to share with anyone? I know we're coming up close on time.
Hmm. I think the thing that like I know like a lot of the people watching are like adults and are in schools or maybe staff. Um, but just to remember that these are not bad kids. And I hear that a lot, and it's sad. It's like heartbreaking to hear, but these are not bad kids. They're all trying to learn. Um,
Yeah.
and let's give them grace and guidance and stop calling them bad, please. Like just like give them some space to grow. I don't know. They already have a lot on their plate, I guess, at home if they see it at home. But these are not bad behaviors. These are more concerning behaviors that we should like a little like light bulb or like alarm should go on our head to check more on the kid instead of assessing them and whatever else.
Yeah, and if you feel like they don't have a healthy place at home or like someone that they can go to, be that healthy adult for them. Be the person that can model and show them how it is to be a healthy, functioning person.
Because we all remember our favorite teacher, so they definitely
Yeah.
won't remember you.
Yeah. And you don't always have to have the right answers. I think sometimes just being there, right, and
Oh yeah.
being that safe space where somebody can be themselves is huge, especially in abuse, especially with isolation involved, especially, so yeah. Thank you guys. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
I do want to quickly share. Again, there will be the survey at the end when you exit the training today. If you do have any follow-up questions, feel free to contact our training email. If you want materials, resources, or if you're interested in a training for your organization. For anyone who's interested, we do have our 24/7 helpline and our website. Again, all of our services are confidential and offered at no cost, which includes individual child and teen counseling, which I know you guys mentioned. Age 14 and up, children and teens can get counseling on their own through us. Anything under 14 would just need permission from a non-abusive parent. And yeah, just a couple additional resources. Love is Respect is another really great resource if you have any questions. There's some national hotlines here as well. And then our upcoming webinar in March, we'll be talking about building those safe spaces and the power of community in times of crisis. So we'll be doing another kind of Q&A, talking about how to create those safe spaces within our communities. And, just really provide that space, not just for the teens in our lives, but for the adults too. So thank you for joining. Yeah, I appreciate you guys for your time and support. Our children and teen team does a great job going into the schools and providing that prevention education. So thank you guys for all you do. And I hope everyone has a great night. Stay safe.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.